Let them. All right, I think we're gonna get going.
We're gonna get started. Just start.
All right. Anyway,
People know.
My name's Sam Parker. I'm a production guy at Piedmont Biofuels, and I'm sure you're all wondering. I am 24 years old. I am young, and I don't want you to think that because that I don't know anything. I have been working at Piedmont for a year now. There's 7 of us in the company now. I know a lot of you have heard of Piedmont when there was 20-something people there, and design, build, and RNA. Right now, Piedmont is collections, production, and distribution. It's what we do. It's what we stick with. We're making money that way, so it's been good. Before that, I was in college. Just about a year ago, I graduated. I was at Dickinson College, and there I was running the biodiesel program. A few of you may know Matt Steinman. He's been a big biodiesel guy. He's been involved in these conferences for a while. And so the system I came into was this lower one here, apple seed reactor, 55-gallon batches, kind of homebrew-tastic. And by the time I graduated my senior year, I had been given money to build a new system. I was managing 5 interns, and I was working on the project that I'm going to talk to you about today. So really this whole thing is about fuel quality, and really a home brewer or small scale person being able to make quality fuel without having to go through the expense or the hassle of ASTM. If you can do, so here's the overview, and we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of it, talk a little bit about ASTM D6751, which is the ASTM standards that regulate biodiesel. I'll talk about BQ9000 and just kind of how that related to what I was doing with this project, and then look at the criteria, how I picked the tests I did, and then talk about those tests. So the concept was a cost thing. I didn't have a lot of money. I couldn't buy a GC, I couldn't buy a flashpoint tester, I couldn't do these things, and I couldn't afford on the college budget to send every batch of fuel I made to Piedmont or to Iowa for testing. It was also a difficulty thing. Running a gas chromatograph is not an easy task. You have to have training, you have to be an analytical chemist, and I wasn't any of these things. And so I really wanted to create a list of tests that a home brewer could do on the cheap and still provide quality fuel to whoever they wanted to give it to. So here's the ASTM standards. This is old. This is the 2008. They haven't changed too much since then, but they have a little bit. But overall, the tests are the same. And it's a big list of tests. And a lot of these tests are actually rollovers from petroleum diesel. Things like distillation, sulfur, the high grades of sulfur. Those are really from petroleum diesel. And so I looked at this, and again, I said, this is expensive, this is difficult, this is not something that I can do. And I don't have anyone or the money to hire someone to do these things for me. So that was kind of where I started. And then I did an internship with Piedmont. And I got to experience BQ9000 testing, the critical producers. And these are kind of good tests. You're able to kind of do them on the cheap. And it's a compact list of really what's important in fuel every time. So this was my starting point. This is what I was looking at going forward. And so I started with free and total glycerin. That's like the most important test for biodiesel. It tests conversion. It tests how much glycerin is left in your fuel. And again, it's done with gas chromatography. And getting a GC is $500,000 or whatever, $50,000. It's expensive. And you have to have an analytical chemist. Someone who's ran these things, knows how to work them, knows how to fix them. Piedmont, we have one of those, so that's awesome. But for a standard person, you're not going to. So the limits for that are by volume, and it's 0.02% for free and 0.24% for total glycerin, which includes free and bound. And so there are alternatives. There's the safe test, which apparently they don't make anymore. And they don't sell the proper, I was informed this recently. And then there's also the Bonanza mini scan. Yeah, and so that sounds like a great test. It's also kind of expensive. It's about $5,000, I think I saw, for one of those. Paradigm sensors, same thing. It's similar to a mini scan. You dip the stick in, and it's, again, a few grand to buy that. But then there's the 27.3 test, which most biodiesel producers have done and know how to do. And you have the materials on hand. It's easy, it's cheap, and really it actually gives you a lot of information. Rachel Burton, who's coming here soon, she went through at one point and quantified the 27.3 tests by the qualification, the visual appearance. And if you get a solid result, if you get clear, no oil dropout, no cloudiness, you really do pass the ASTM standard. And so I picked this test. Again, it's cheap, it's easy, it's affordable, you have the materials, like, it works. So then I looked at water and sediment. And those are important because you have water. If you have water in your fuel, it's going to cause engine issues for your end users, and you don't want to deal with that. It also can cause the fuel to oxidize sooner, go rancid, get just nasty. And so the test that ASTM uses for that is a centrifuge, and you drop in 100 milliliters into a centrifuge, spin it, and if there's any water or sediment or anything that falls out, then you quantify that in the centrifuge. So there are alternatives, and really the alternatives I looked at were moisture tests, looking at how sediment can come out easily in a filter. Filter your stuff as long as you're filtering everything consistently, which at Piedmont we filter constantly. You can just worry about the moisture. Moisture can be retained in biodiesel up to 1,500 ppm, and that's actually too much. That's where you won't see it, where it won't fall out in the water and sediment. But it's still enough to cause the oxidation, cause engine issues, and cause rancidity in your fuel. So there are a couple of alternatives. The two that I looked at were Carl Fisher. Carl Fisher apparatus is kind of expensive. It's a great machine. It gives you really accurate readouts. It's awesome, but it's expensive. And then the Sandy Bray test. Sandy Bray tests are easy. They're affordable. Like, you can get them. I think you get them from Utah Biodiesel Supply for $200. The materials are not inexpensive, so I ran with that, and I've used it in a lot. It works. It's good. We still use it periodically at Piedmont. So yeah. And then there was kinematic viscosity, which isn't part of the BQ9000 critical producers, but it is kind of an important test, I think, because really what it's looking for is the thickness of your fuel. At a very basic level, what we're doing to vegetable oil to make biodiesel is thinning it out. And if your fuel isn't thin enough, it won't run through your injectors right. It won't. It'll cause engine issues. And so it kind of looks at conversion as well as just the thickness of your fuel. So the ASTM test is the D445, and it uses a glass capillary viscometer. Those are not terribly expensive. I looked them up. They range between $75 and $200. And so those gas capillaries, they're kind of difficult to use though. And what I found is that there's this whole slew of viscometers, like all over the place. They're around the same price. They're really easy to use. So I bought one about $180, and it's just you dip it into your fuel and pull it out and time it, and that'll give you your numbers. So yeah, cloud point. So the cloud point test is important. It's simply just for blending, knowing when it's cold enough, the fuel is going to turn into a popsicle in your fuel tank, and it's really important for your end users. The limit on this is a report, so you don't actually have a limit, just because of the varied feedstocks, everything we do in biodiesel that would cause this. The device is a Pelletier device, and it's not cheap. We actually don't have one at Piedmont. We send it out to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, and they test it for us. And as far as I can tell, their machine keeps breaking and giving us weird numbers. But anyway, so my alternative for this was really crude, and hence the ellipsis after it. I used a refrigerator method, and basically all I did is I got a beaker full of biodiesel and a thermometer and stuck it in a fridge. And every so often you just check on it real quick, and as soon as it turns cloudy, it starts to gel up. Read the temperature on the thermometer, and you know roughly your cloud point. It'll get you close enough that you can tell when to blend. Metals. So we've never failed a metals test at Piedmont. But that being said, it's because we keep our soaps low. Metals include potassium and sodium, and then also the calcium and magnesium test. They all use the same test. It's a European standard. It's the inductively coupled plasma optical emission spectroscopy. And if anyone knows what that is, then I'd be impressed, because I have no idea what that is. But really with metals show up in the soaps formed from your catalyst, your KOH or NaOH. Or it would show up in calcium, magnesium from hard water from water washing. So the test I used was this modified AOCS CC1779. It's a simple titration. Instead of doing an acid titration like an FFA or an acid number, you're going in the other direction. You're going from basic to acidic, so you're adding an HCl solution. And again, you have a lot of the materials already from doing titrations, so that's easy to have on hand. You need a different indicator and a different titrant solution, but it works. I got that, I think, out of the Better Biodiesel or Building a Successful Biodiesel Business book. It's a good test, very easy to do. And then finally, I used acid number. So acid number is important because of the corrosion that acid can cause to engines. And the test they use is a crazy titration that I can't pronounce. And it uses electrodes in the fuel, and it titrates with a solution, and it reads out a number. The alternative method is an ASTM method, and is a simple acid titration, very, very similar to your FFA titrations. And so, again, you have the materials, cost effective, easy to do. You already have to know how to do it. So, so this is the compiled list of all the tests that I came up with. And I think afterwards I can answer questions about why I excluded a lot of the ASTM tests. But the end result of the whole thing was I created a SOP list of all of these tests, and it includes an FFA test, a sampling method. And this was to guide my college as I left in how to make fuel quality. And really I hope for this document to be a kind of like an open source document. I want input, I want people to have it and use it and go through it. So yeah, that was my final project, and if you want one of these, I'm going to have an email list set up.
Can you post it online where we can?
Yeah, I do want to post it on the biodiesel forum, the biodiesel also SVO forum. I can't remember what the website is, but yeah. So I want to post it on. I want to make it open source. I want everyone to be able to use it, look at it, read it, go through it. And so. I guess at this point, I had a pretty short presentation because I assumed there was going to be a lot of questions. And so at this point, I'm open for questions. This is my work. Yeah.
27.3 test that you use, excuse me, it's 27 milliliters of methanol for every 3 liters of fuel.
Yep.
And you do it by shaking and see if you have separation?
Yeah, so yeah, you blend them together and shake it up, and we throw it in a fridge for 10 minutes at Piedmont, and that's just a way to accelerate any separation that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's worked great. You can actually double the recipe, and so you can see more. Mm-hmm. But as long as your test ends up clear, and I think you know what I mean. Like, it's clear versus a cloudy test. Mm-hmm. There's no oil dropout. we've never had a problem passing the gas chromatograph doing that.
Where do we contact you for that paper?
I gave you one of my cards. My card has an email. I'm going to put out a piece of paper up here. If anyone wants it, they can sign up, and I'll send out an email with this document. I think we're going to post it on the Piedmont website, so it might be up there soon. Yeah, just email me is fine.
We're a distributor. We don't make any fuel.
Yeah.
We were getting fuel from the same supplier all the time, and we've never had any problems for years. Now we're kind of shopping around because they're out of business. We may start doing quality tests. And I wonder if you could kind of go back through your list and just briefly talk about how much time it would take to do each one and what you might recommend or not recommend to do as a distributor receiving a load of about 2,000 gallons in a tanker.
Well, so as a distributor, I'd say the first thing is you need to be getting a C of A from the company who's providing you with your fuel, and I'm sure you do.
It's the problem with that is, you don't have to test for every batch. So C of A could be 2 months old. There's no standard for how old it should be. Legally, they don't ever have to do it after the very first batch they ever make. Batches might be 5,000 gallons, maybe 20,000 gallons. It's I definitely get them sometimes, but it's I get them from every producer.
Okay.
But not every producer every time for every batch for every load.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe I have a skewed vision. Like on
Right.
Piedmont, we do testing every batch, every time, and we produce a C of A every time.
Most producers, they send them off, so they're looking at $1,000 a pop. So our
Yeah.
producer, they do 4,000 or 5,000 gallon batches, put it in a 20,000 gallon tank, mix it up, and then send that off. So there's a cost of about 5 cents a gallon.
Okay.
But the smaller producers, if they spend that 1,000, it might be 20 or 30 cents a gallon.
Yep. So I guess to talk about that, what tests I would do, I would actually probably do most of these. You're in Texas, I wouldn't worry about cloud point.
Right.
And viscosity, that could come or go. Like I would do it if I were you, but you wouldn't have it. You could also get away with not doing it. Definitely doing, I left a test on here that isn't there. The flash point with density, that doesn't actually work. I was talking to our analytical chemist and he said no. But definitely do a 27.3. Getting a clear result from that. There's an old presentation that Rachel did that has the numbers for the visuals, which I have on my computer I can send out. It's also on the Piedmont website. I would definitely do moisture. You got to worry about water separating out, water in fuel tanks, etc. Acid number, and then the soaps or the modified metals test.
Does your PDF show anything about how to do each one? Or is it
Yeah,
just
so
one
this is actually a full list of SOPs on
Okay.
how to do each one of those tests.
Okay.
Do you want me to
you
make
did
copies
mention
of
the-
that? I can do that.
Can you?
Yes.
I would love that. We could make some copies of this.
If you guys want to
Sure.
wait for me to do it.
We got plenty of time. So
I also wanted to ask about the flip test. We used that for a long time. Somebody came out with some fake flip tests. We used those for a while. They weren't as reliable. Went back to the real flip test. Do you guys use them at Piedmont, or are you just so comfortable doing your own thing? You just
we don't use them, and I think for a number of reasons. One, I think we're comfortable. We have above and beyond the flip test. The other thing is that what I didn't like about the flip test is that a lot of the data is not quantifiable. So it's all a visual thing, and if you don't quite read that right, or whatever it is, so that's why I didn't go with a flip test. That's why I've never really used it or liked it. But I've also known people that have used them for years and love them. So
You don't have any sulfur content test.
I don't.
What's the reason for that?
Well, primarily it's a cost thing. It's hard to do a sulfur test. You have to send it out. It costs us a few $100s to do one. And there really isn't much sulfur in biodiesel, inherently. I've never seen a batch of biodiesel fail a sulfur, a 15 ppm sulfur. We usually hit around 4. So I didn't.
You're not using any animal or tallow?
No, we're very little. We used to use chicken fat, and we've gone far, far away from that. We occasionally get small quantities of beef tallow, but that gets mixed into 4,500 gallon batches at like, I don't know, 55 gallons per 4,500 gallon batch. So
Why do you move away from the chicken?
we were having we had the winter of chicken at Piedmont, and we had a whole group of our members very angry with us because they were waking up in the morning and having to push their car into the sun so that the block of biodiesel goo could melt so they could turn their car on. It was a big fiasco. They didn't blend that year for whatever reason, or if they were going to blend, I think they had to be like B50. So we just moved away from it. Also, the plant that we were getting the chicken fat from has now closed. So if we'd stayed with it and we were relying on that, we would have been in a big pickle right now. So.
What about specific heats, octane levels?
So the cetane levels, that comes back to, like, I've never seen a cetane fail.
Right.
BQ 9000 sets a cetane. You have to do a cetane test once a year, and that's it. I wouldn't worry about cetane. You can, if you think it's concerning, if you're concerned about your cetane levels, just get a cetane booster, and that should do you well. I've seen a number of, you can buy these little they're octane testers. So the problem I ran into is I found all these little octane cetane testers that you put a sample in and it reads it out for you. None of them have a biodiesel standard. So I don't know if they would function well with biodiesel. That's why I didn't commit to it. I called the people and they were like, we don't do biodiesel, or they didn't know what it was, and I was like, all right, I'm not dealing with this. On
the topic of cetane boosters, have you ever done any tests to measure whether they're effective or not? I've always kind of understood that they are only effective if they're used in diesel that's then blended into the biodiesel. I didn't realize that they had any ability to work directly with biodiesel.
You know, I don't know. I haven't done the test. Someone who may have done the test is Rachel Burton. She used to work for Piedmont. She's now started her own company called Micronodal Energies. She'll be here shortly, and she would be the one to ask about that. I don't know if NREL has done anything with it, or I don't know. One test that I wish I could have included, and that's kind of super important, is oxidative stability. And unfortunately, there's really only one way to test oxidative stability, and it's get a ransom at or whatever the other machine is, and huge expense on the machine and knowing how to use them and calibrating and everything. And so I would say to anyone who's producing fuel that wants,
I've got more
that is concerned about oxidation, that has fuel sitting around for longer than a month or two, go to a local biodiesel producer or someone and ask them if you can buy 5 gallons of their stabilizer and dose very small amounts of stabilizer into your fuel, and that way you don't have to worry about it.
We actually manufacture some stabilizers.
Okay.
Brand name's Fuel Fresh. If you ever went to Briggs and Stratton shop, see the little blue vials.
Okay, that's you
the
guys.
stuff.
Cool.
But
Yeah, we currently use Ethanox as our fuel stabilizer, and I know that that is crazy expensive, and they only sell it in the form of totes.
our stuff's antioxidants, and that was the basis from which we spun into additives for economy.
Okay,
So
cool. Yeah.
Have you guys found any cold flow additives to work well with biodiesel?
We haven't used many. We are usually pretty good on our cold flow. Keeping moisture down is really key to cold flow. So keeping moisture levels below 1,000 ppm. Again, filtering, using a series of filters as you go through your process. We have a filter before we get to our terminal tank, and then we'll filter in the terminal tank. So anything that would cause us to fail a cold flow, moisture or just particulate, they're removed. So yeah, I haven't seen any cold flow that works though.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff we've used has been designed for diesel. It's at a molecular level, and so they advertise it works up to B20 because it just additizes the 80% of diesel.
Got it.
But there are a couple of companies in Ohio called Lubrizol that made different ones for different biodiesel feedstocks, And when you use used cooking, obviously you never know what it's gonna be. We didn't find them very effective.
Okay.
It seems like one day somebody will figure it out. It's not yet.
You haven't come up with an alternative for the flashpoint then?
No, I haven't. And that's kind of unfortunate. I would have liked to. So I thought this density test would have worked, but the variance in feedstock density of biodiesel. So I use peanut oil this batch, and then canola this batch, and then soybeans this batch. Like that changes the density of the biodiesel itself, and so there's too much variation there to pick up minor amounts of methanol that's in it. If you can find a flashpoint tester, an old used one, I would go for it. Most people, I found a lot of people still water wash. We still water wash, and that would take 98% of the methanol out that was left. So, yeah.
I don't think that you've got a test on your sheet here for the metals.
It's called the soap titration,
Oh,
which is basically the way that the metals will show up in your fuel.
You guys ever blend kerosene biodiesel?
No, I've heard of that though.
Yeah, I heard it lowers the cloud point and increases viscosity.
I've heard of that. I heard of people in Alaska doing that and running biodiesel and like an B20 blend with kerosene. We haven't done it. We use B100 for 9 months out of the year, and the last 3 we do B80. It's North Carolina, it doesn't get all that cold, so. And all of our pump locations are well insulated, usually passive solar, so. Yeah.
This is just a kind of question out of curiosity. But what is the concern in terms of metals in the fuel? Is that an emissions question, or is it a performance or engine?
It's a performance, an engine issue.
Is there any-
It'll cause buildup in the engine and cause havoc, wreak havoc. I think there's part of it is an emissions issue, but those don't really, from what I understand, is that they don't really burn. And so that's the problem, is where they kind of just are left. Some of the other tests I left out, I told you about distillation. That's an old petroleum thing. Like the distillation point for biodiesel is way higher than petroleum diesel, and the standard is actually still reflected. It's the diesel standard. It's just straight up like they haven't changed anything from diesel. It's the state diesel standard. I left out phosphorus. Phosphorus shows up in biodiesel if you're using non-degummed feedstocks. So stuff that came straight out of the press that has all the gook in it, and most people don't process with that. It's just too hard. You have to clean that up. And I haven't ever seen a phosphorus fail again. Copper strip corrosion I left out. It's essentially reflecting the acid number test. Copper strip you can do a copper strip corrosion. It's easy, but I just wouldn't bother. You're testing for acids anyway. You're already testing for, if you use these tests, you're already testing for everything that could cause that corrosion. Sulfated ash. I've watched our lab tech, our chemist Paul, do a number of these sulfated ash tests, and I forget what's the standard for it.
0.02.
0.02. Yeah, he gets negative numbers when he does the test. And he's done it correctly every time, and he does it in accordance with the ASTM cross checks that we do all the time, and it's just kind of a wonky, weird test that I've never seen work. Sulfur, just inherently low sulfur. Cetane. I didn't include cold soak filterability. I don't think there's really an alternative aside from the ASTM method. I mean, you could just cold filter your fuel if you wanted to. But as long as your moisture is low and you keep the particulate out of your fuel, you'll be all right for the most part on cold soak.
Well, I mean, cold soaks depend on feedstock.
It also depends
So, I
on
mean-
feedstock. So if you're using beef tallow,
Yeah.
you're probably going to fail. We are a variable feedstock plant. We use everything that comes our way, and we haven't failed in a long time. So,
Well, maybe one question I would have is how do beef tallow biodiesel people pass cold soak? Because they naturally have a higher cut point. Same with polymer. I mean, how do they
Yeah.
pass that test?
I don't know. I honestly couldn't tell you. They might have to add stuff to
They might be
it.
distilling it actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Last time we bought beef fat biodiesel, it was distilled.
Okay. So it would take a lot of
Which
that
is
stuff
amazing
out.
fuel, by the way.
Yeah.
Distilled biodiesel is amazing.
So, yeah. Carbon residue. I didn't find. I don't know. I don't know. Do you have any opinion on carbon residue or anyone?
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I don't. It's not even. I mean, we do once a year full slate. Again, haven't ever failed the carbon residue. So, yeah. That's really. I mean, there's. I mean, so again, I don't claim this to be perfect, and I don't want this to be like the end all be all. But I want people to look at it and say, all right, well, I like this. I don't like this. I want to help fix this, etc. Any other questions? I know it's kind of early.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.